Magandang hapon po. So welcome to the Soil Resources as part of the discussion for the Earth Science. Before we begin, we need to have some definitions and that will focus on pedosphere. Pedosphere is a soil mantle of the Earth. It is actually the basic scientific concept of soils as specific bodies in the nature that develop in the time and space in a situ at the land surface due to the processes resulting from the interaction of soil farming. So pedosphere is actually technically a sphere that covers the soil as a resources. Is actually one of the peripheral features of the earth in terms of exposing the soil. So we have the following. So photosphere is actually an intersection between other ecological spheres such as lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. So as you can see and notice in the given um, uh, framework, or we call that one as a graphic organizer, you can see that pedosphere is actually in the center. It has encompassing feature on all of the ecological services and ecological spheres. So in terms of hydrosphere, for example, it participates in evaporation and precipitation. For the atmosphere, it also participates for the photosynthesis and respiration because without the plants able to thrive in the pedosphere or thrive able will be able to cultivate in the soil, there is no such process of photosynthesis and respiration at all. So this is very essential and one of the key factors in actually in the life or the biodiversity. So these factors are parent materials, climate, organisms, topography, and time. In which in manner the pedosphere represents in intersections of the lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere and biosphere. So since we defined already what is a pedosphere all about, we shall go with the soil. So soil are the complex mixture of minerals, water, air, organic matter, and countless organisms. So this may be include living and also a non-living manure, or we call it animal manure, or even the humus, which is a decaying remains of once living things. It can be fossilized, it can be already decayed, so it depends upon on the composition. So these are actually development of the soil is believed to influence by some factors such as climate. So the types of the soil that is preferential for use in industrial or commercial is something to be influenced by the type of topography and climate. And the kind of soil that is you can see in different land is already varies from loam, clay, and sandy. And this is actually because of the temperature again and climate. So decayed living organisms or matter, such as humus formation and nutrients in the soil, is actually one of the ingredients that you can also find in the soil. So unconsolidated rocks and minerals can be also find it. We can also find physical features and of on the area of topography. So it may be on the slope, the tips of the land. So how you can see it, it can be classified because of the soil. So soil is classified also based on the texture, color, and water content and size of the particles. So some of the soils might be, for some instance, it can be from granite particles to mga pinong-pino, very sift. It can be sift. It cannot be sift. So depends. The texture will be somewhat rough, smooth, or color will be brown, brackish brown. Okay, brackish colors, black, red, mud red. So it depends on the consistency of the material. So also, we noted that there is a parent material such as rock and minerals. So sometimes the rocks and minerals also added the color in that particular types of soil. So there are different kinds of soil, but we will have not focus on this one because our primary goal is not the other, not this kind of soil. But I'm going to discuss again in a nutshell. This is actually the most in common terms of kinds of soil. So we have sandy, silty, clay, loamy, peaty, chalky, and alkaline. So I will not be discussing it, but this is actually to get you familiarized with. So what are the conditions of a soil? There are conditions. If we have conditions to live, we have also conditions of soil for as well. So soil in the forest is actually developed from the thick humus layers, and they have the rich diversity of the large trees and animals that lives there. So we have a rich diversity, meaning we have a lot of variety of species living in that particular area because of excessive layer of humus that's actually needed by plants, that's actually needed by most of the growing crops, trees. It provides shelter to the animals, and it's quite needed by um, to support life and biodiversity, promote biodiversity in that area. Without that, we cannot expect such things. So precipitation exceeds evapotranspiration, which result in excess of water that percolates downward through the soil layers. So because of this, we develop some systems in terms of the climate that's actually not the same with those who are living in cities and urban areas, because again, they have precipitation that exceeds the rainfall amount that can an urban area can experience. We have another one, which is a soil in tropics. So the tropical soils are formed in areas with high annual temperature and rainfall. So they can experience severe drought, severe rainfall that can causes flood. So the intense weathering causes the soil to be nutrient poor because it deteriorates the materials that needed in a nutritious soil, such as the topsoil. So it can be resulted in a soil erosion because, for example, there is a huge rainfall amount. It can be removed because of the rainfall, and it can be causes by the flood. We have also the soil in grassland and desert. So precipitation in grassland is equal to the less than of evapotranspiration and causes soil development to operate in relative drought. So in grassland, there is a minimum optimized level of precipitation that is good for some of the animals and plants. And leaching and migration of weathering products is therefore decreased. And so also large amount of evaporation causes build-up of calcium and other large cations, flocculate, clay materials, clay minerals, and fulvic acids in the upper soil profile. Okay. Also, in this particular area, there is impermeable clay limits downward. There is a percolation of water and fulvic acid and reducing chemical weathering and fossilization. So the depth to maximum concentration of clay increases in the area of increased precipitation and leaching. And when leaching is decreased, the calcium precipitates in calcite in lower soil, a layer known as calcilage. So the soil quality and services, we have the following. Soil quality is the ability of the soil to determine what kind of type of material it can surface into and what organic, inorganic, or organic particle it has. So soil is the loose surface material that consists of either organic or inorganic material that covers the land surface. So soil quality, on the other hand, is the capacity of a specific kind of soil to function. So again, it varies from the types and it varies from the usage. So to sustain plants and animal productivity, maintain or enhance water and air quality. So that's actually the product of soil quality. And again, it can also support human health and habitation. So soil quality is the ability of the soil to perform functions, okay, that are essential to the people and environment. Because again, soil is actually, you can have it in a pedosphere, and pedosphere is actually serve as an interconnected pathway for different ecosphere, and it allows you to give not only the specific functions to the environment, but also to give limited to agricultural soils. And most of the quality has to do with building homes, building cities. Because again, if you have poor quality of soil, you can have a poor foundation for your buildings and homes. So you have to assess the quality of the soil that's much needed. And syempre, we need to understand that it's actually for the agriculture. Without it, we cannot provide food for our tables. We cannot provide security in terms of in fighting poverty and hungry, because we don't have resources to combat uh, our own basic needs. So for the soil quality definition, we have one, management effects on soil properties. So there is actually lots of management that can affect soil properties for agriculture, urban planning, etc. Then essential services provided by soil, there are so many. Then there is soil meeting multiples and sometimes conflicting goals. So it's actually depends on agrarian reform and resistance and resilience to disturbance as characteristic of a healthy soil. So again, it's agricultural and urban planning. So for the essential services provided by the soil supports plant growth, recycle of dead material, and regulate and filter water flows, support buildings and roads that I have been discussed already, and provide habitat for many plants and animals. Depending on the land use, many of these functions occur simultaneously. So soil quality assessment go beyond measuring degradation or erosion. It also with the function and process that creates them. So we try to see and overlook what soil can give us more than what it is should be. That's how we go in science. So we assess how soil will be exploited as a resources. So because of compaction and contamination, maybe because of agriculture, we use a lot of fertilizers that becomes part of a runoff. And in terms of resistance and resilience, we find there's a phase of disturbance in essential services, whether natural or human induced. But most of the time, we have given it as a human induced. So a soil is not considered healthy if it is managed for short term. So we need to manage it in a future manner that is actually we have plans. If we just use it for productivity of crops, we might lose the nutrients of the soil over time. So we need to produce plans and actions that is actually resilient to the disturbance of characteristic of a healthy soil. Soil is a non-renewable resources. Why? Because over time, the nutrients in the soil is going to diminish. It's being used by the plants. But because of our aggressive move, we cannot tell how much nutrients can the soil holds from now because of acid rain, because of a lot of factors. And soil is a non-renewable resources because it's a basis for food, feeds, medicine, ecosystem services, and fuel. We forgot that soil is one of the important resources in the earth next to water. How could you build homes? How can you grow crops, food crops especially? How can you I cannot see in the future that we can hold poultry and other animal livestock in the ocean floating in the rivers or oceans. That's actually with regards to the soil resources. Our soil today is about 33% of the global soil is already degraded. And in Sub-Saharan Africa, 83% of the rural people is already dependent on their livelihood on the land. But 40% of the American Africa soils are currently degraded, meaning almost half is already lost already to the ideas that it can be cultivated. So in the most countries, there's a little opportunity for expansion of arable lands. So these arable lands are lands that can be converted or cultivated. They can be um, this can be used for agricultural purposes. But because of salination, acidification, erosion, a lot of lands could not be converted. In the Philippines, in the case we try to convert lands from agricultural to something urbanized area. So it hampers the soil's function and also the food production. We have to make sure that our countrymen has enough food production supply. So we need to focus on utilizing the soil, which may able to not only benefit the urbanization but also benefit our people in terms of food security. So we need inclusive policies and governance. We need to target soil research. We need sustainable growth by means of sustainable soil management. We have to stop soil degradation and restoring degraded soils, and we have to make soil information system. This is very essential because a nation that destroys its soil destroy itself. Nobody and no nations had been able to stand or float in the water for a long term. Every nation needs its soil to cultivate and provide food security, which is keeping soil surface vegetated and using nutrients wisely. Soil analysis and pesticide analysis is a way how we can make uh, assumptions how the soil is nutrient rich or it has a micronutrient deficiency. For the pesticide analysis, we can tell if there is a pesticide present in that particular soil. It's if it has a pesticide, it is very harmful. We need to analyze that one if it has a presence or it has a content. And how we do that, it is here. So soil analysis is a various of chemical processes that determine the amount of available plant nutrients. So it is actually a soil health. It is important because if you want to grow crops, you want to target it with a right amount of nutrients, or you want to grow crops, especially in not an arable lands, you have to make use of the land or the soil, preferably to the crops able to grow. So pesticide analysis naman is referring to the examination of pesticides that may remain in the soil or in the food. So usually, if we apply pesticides in, for example, in green leafy vegetables, some of that will be part of the runoff in the soil, or some will be able to stay in the vegetable that we eat. And the maximum allowable level should be able to stipulate it only. So there is allowable limits. Next. So agricultural activity directly influence the chemistry of the soil in many ways. There is disposal of animals, there is plant then there is plant or food processing waste, there is contamination from application of pesticides and depletion of the soil, and salt and mineral accumulation from irrigation. It could result to salination. So all of these are actually human induced. So we try to see that plant and food processing is one of the common shared problem uh, in terms of waste production. It's actually we try to make more of agricultural waste than the human waste in the household. And agricultural waste is a serious threat to the soil because uh, we have a lot of it every day. We produce a lot of agricultural waste from time to time. Unlike in household, a common household is in each person can produce a 1 kilogram waste per day. But here in the agricultural waste, imagine a food and milk is being spoiled. Where it will go? There's no such thing as food and milk processors that could seriously make it more viable, or unless we I'm trying to speak that spoiled foods and milk will go into the garbage areas, or it might be able to dump in spacious areas or empty lots. So excessive supply of fruits and vegetables, including fruit peelings, is actually agricultural waste. Cotton waste that has pesticides, mechanized meat processing industry is also having liquid waste. It's also affecting the soil quality. So all of it is actually a serious threat to the soil. And when that is happening, we have also in fertilizers, it contribute to water pollution. And remember, again, is something to do with the runoff. There's excess release of nitrogen and phosphorus in the soil. That's why you have algal bloom. When you have algal bloom, you see the leeks turns from brackish brown or a blue or translucent white into a greenish material. So it has a eutrophication of water, wherein there is a lot of algae, and it can kill the fishes because it consumes much more of the oxygen that is needed by the fishes. And it also releases materials that's not suitable for the fishes and other sea and water resources. Uh, it could not be a viable or high yield farming uh, options. So when there's happening on that, that is actually the worst thing that could happen to us. So when there is a runoff of fertilizer, other we have to pay it. So we will have more time on these agricultural waste, then Mother Nature has more time to dealing with us. So in terms of fertilizers and soil pollution, poor agricultural practices is one leading cause of why there is a poor soil quality more than the other one. Improper solid waste is another thing. Unsafe storage of the hazardous chemical. Leaches from the mines, mismanaged landfills. This is actually tailings of the sanitary landfill or uncontrolled dumping of waste. But more or less, poor agricultural practices is one of the key terms, especially for those who have been tagged as agricultural country. And there is a threat. There is actually a threat in many ways, as you can see in our slides. So what is the role of micronutrient in the soil? So when a soil has deficient mineral content, it is rendered unsuitable for further cultivation unless you need to revive the soil by giving its nutrients back. How? We have to make it by means of fertilizer. So through the use of soil testing, we will be able to analyze micronutrient deficiencies. If there's a micronutrient deficiency, we will not be able to grow crops. Without crops, we don't have foods. We don't have foods, we cannot make another consumers such as the livestock to be able to promote its needed grow. Because it's also supported by uh, growing crops, unless we have to make it with feeds. But feeds is also use some sorts of soil. There are some reasons that limiting incidental additions to the micronutrients, and there are a lot of it. It is not true that each and every plant of crops needs all of these metals, but they thrive better on at least one of them. So it depends on what crops you're going to put into. So these are an example. If you have boil deficiency in corn, you can see the yellowish part. If you have copper deficiency in wheat, you can see some yellowish on its stalk. In the iron deficiency in wheat, you can also see the yellow to green, yellowish part in its leaves. For the manganese, the color had been changed from so much green. You have deficiency in soybeans of manganese. For the molybdenum deficiency in wheat, you can also see that the soil is cracking up. And for the zinc deficiency in what in soybeans, you see that the leaves is already crumpled. So there is deficiency in micronutrients, and you want to address that so that you can crops your crops have a high valued high yielding crops becomes high yielding crops. You have to address the micronutrient deficiency, and these are the indicators. So if you see one of those in your crops, you need to provide mitigation on the process of its growing by adding more of its needed mineral or material. So there are relatively responsiveness of selected crops and micronutrients. So we have the following for the boron, copper, manganese, and zinc. So these are the tables that you can have in your handouts. Okay. So how we analyze the micronutrient in soil? We get a sample by means of sampling procedures. We get 10 centimeters of ricin, and there's our samples are ground to the fine powder or hooded mesh. So using nitric perchloric acid. So it's actually a laboratory procedure, and we use the sample for the test. We call that one as AAS, or the uh, this one is we call atomic absorption spectrometry. It provides elemental analysis technique that provides quantitative information of 50 different elements. So it uses just like in the light microscope. I mean in the high beaming microscope, it allows you to give information on what atom present in that particular content. If we determine what kind of atom, we can determine what elements present in the soil. So we will be able to also to provide data how much of that element is present in that particular soil. So, for example, for this analysis, we need the following extracted with suitable buffers for the various elements as follows. So that is listed in this slide. You can also view that in your given handouts. So how do we get trace elements in analysis in soil? We use Van V graph sampler. So it's actually like a dump truck that has a claws that can get a sample dried of sediments. It's actually collected in the basins of the river so that we can find the dilution. We can find the elemental analysis in soil. Another one is you can get soil sampling by just making a taps of a pile and getting a 10 centimeter. But if you want to get more larger of your sample, you can get it by Van Graaff. So the wavelength for analysis detection limit is used in AAS for bio's micronutrient deficiency. And for pesticide and pollution, pesticides are the worst enemy of the man because some of it will not be getting off with the plants. Excessive usage contaminates lithosphere and pollutes atmosphere also. It releases lots of, for example, the methane. For the hydrosphere, it pollutes also because it becomes part of the runoff. It it includes herbicide, fungicide, and insecticide. These are persistent pollutants obtained during interaction of lithosphere and biosphere. So a pesticide like DDT is actually part of sprays for the mosquitoes. It's actually removed now in the market, part of the ingredients. However, the production has been remained same due to its consumption of developing countries because it's actually cheap than other materials that can be used. But it's actually changing the fertility of mammals and it affects also the soil. So these are actually the laboratory techniques that you can use to find if a soil has a pesticide. We have TLC or the thin layer chromatography. We use this one to separate the non-volatile mixture. We add this in glass, plastic or aluminum foil, which is coated with a thin layer of absorbent material, which is usually silicon gel, aluminum oxide, or cellulose. So it's actually the same with chromatography technique, but it's only used a thin layer. Okay, for the polarography is a rapid, sensitive, and relatively specific technique that can be applied to pesticide to know the residue is present or not. And the technique should be also prove the valuable tool in pesticide research. It can be monitored using the new column or studying kinetics, identifying determinants of metabolites, assaying primary pesticide standards, and conducting stability studies. And we have also the uh, UV spectrophotometry or the UVBs or UVVs. It refers to the spectroscopy or reflectance of spectroscopy in part of the ultraviolet full. It's actually the same with the rest of the ideas from the thin layer and holography, but this time it uses full range of the UV light and adjusted visible spectral regions. That means it uses light that is visible and non-visible as well. So in response to this, in terms of soil quality, we need to be calling for the stewards of God's creation. So our response to this as a call for stewards of God's creation, the challenge for us is not to change everything that we need to change for the betterment of our soil management, but we need to change our behavior because this is actually a very important aspect in changing our old-fashioned way or our solution for the climate change. We don't need a lot of technology. We don't need a lot of research if that will not be used for the betterment. We need to change our behavior. We need to rethink, we need to redo how we use the soil, how we use other nature resources. We could be benefit, but also let's also be careful in using it. Some of it might be not able to replenish over time, and that is actually in terms of our behavior. So this is actually again behavior change is very important as a mandate of Catholic social teaching, and this is something to do with the stewardship as a God's or stewards of God's creation. That will be all, and maraming salamat po, and God bless po kayong lahat.